Hello and welcome to the Service Ducks podcast. I am co-host James Downs.
And I'm Russ here, and we're here to chat about all things ServiceNow, everyday life as a ServiceNow consultant, new features, implementation successes, and perhaps more entertaining when it doesn't go quite so well. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Service Ducks podcast. James, talk to me. What have you been up to? Give us a lowdown. How's your week been? Have you been talking to any more ex-Man United defenders lately?
Unfortunately not, no. It peaked at Dennis Irwin, to be honest with you. So
That was the peak.
That was the peak, yeah. There might be more coming up in the new year, but we'll soon see. My week, fairly quiet, to be quite honest with you.
That's always, well, I say that's always the way in the run-up to Christmas. It's usually quite busy. Why haven't you been out to any pantos? You must have been to a panto.
No, my problem is my second child is only 14 months, so she would be an absolute nightmare at the panto. It's
that's what it's for, though, isn't it? For screaming kids.
Screaming.
It's behind you.
Nah, we'd rather not stress, to be honest. I'm good for that.
True.
But no, just usual lead up to Christmas. A few. I'll tell you what I did do. Something very exciting is that we had gone on the Polar Express. So for those who have watched the film,
Ooh.
Tom Hanks and co.
Yeah.
So up in Norfolk, as we say.
Right. Okay.
There was a nice.
My favourite football team. That.
What, Norfolk?
No, Norfolk and Chance.
Oh.
Am I allowed to say that?
No, you have now.
I have. Okay.
Yeah, so that was really good. We went to this quite derelict train station, and
Sounds nice.
there was quite a few actors, so literally hundreds of people turning up to board this train, where the usual songs and dances happen up and down your kind of carriage. So you've each got a table and they serve you hot chocolate as per the film.
This sounds pretty cool.
It's really good, yeah. And of course Santa comes in and you're essentially travelling down a couple of train stops and back again. So there's elves that come on board singing and dancing, and great for the kids. And they get a little bell afterwards, so those who've watched the film, they know the reason why.
Right, I was going to say, that's a bit stingy.
Yeah, there was no actual
present.
They don't get a present. And it's like 30, 40 quid, and you don't get a present. What? You get a bell.
That's the whole point, isn't it?
I don't know. I think it was quite entertaining, to be fair.
Yeah, you've just reminded me. We went on a Santa visit at the weekend as well. It's got to be done.
Yeah.
Ours wasn't as elaborate as that, though. It was
Did you sit on his knee? Oh, right.
No, I wasn't allowed. It is. What have I been doing this week that's noteworthy? I've been doing lots of stuff.
Yeah.
Whether you want to know about it is a different thing. I'll tell you what I've done, actually. Non-work related. So I can't remember whether I told you, but I was doing this. They call it a 6-pack challenge. So I'm into my running, right? That's one of my things. It's been since lockdown.
Yep.
And I did this 6-pack challenge. It's basically you pay and you get 6 runs to do. And it's all around the local area. But you turn up, you don't really, well, you do know the route, but you turn up and then you've got audio cues where you're going. So you're kind of running through a forest and it'll say, turn left, turn right.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So you have to keep stopping to go, am I going on the right direction?
Yeah.
Look at the map. But yeah, it was good fun, actually. It was freezing cold.
So you done your first one of those? So was that first one done?
That was number 2, actually. Excuse me. Yeah, that was number 2. And it's good because you're out on your own with your own thoughts. And you just get to see the surroundings. Like, it takes you to places that you've perhaps never been to before in your
Does it give you
area,
enough kind of like pre-warning before the actual turn? Like in 50 yards, a bit like a sat nav. 50 yards, turn left. Or do you get there, you stop and you're like, which way am I going? Nope, I'm going that way.
I don't think I run fast enough to overshoot. Do you know what I mean? I'm not like some racing car that sprints past the turning. No, it gives you advance warning. It'll tell you like in 50 metres you're going left or right or whatever. But yeah, it's good fun. That's my non-work-related thing. The other thing I've been doing, which is quite interesting this week, is I've been messing around with predictive intelligence.
Okay.
Slightly ironic, given it's me, but I've been messing around with that. The classification framework specifically. So looking at attributes on a certain record and what field can we set.
Yeah.
And I've got to be honest, it's frustrated me a bit this week because it seemingly it just works based on that one record, right? So if you've got a load of attributes on that one record, you can say, I'm going to predict that another attribute that I want to set on the same record is X. But I want to go to another record, right? So I want to say, I don't know, the attributes on the incident are X, Y, Z, therefore set another field which is on a linked record, maybe a problem, maybe a change.
Right, yeah.
And you can get at that via database views. But yeah, I was playing around with database views and it wouldn't work for me. I don't know. Maybe I need to play a bit longer. But that's been... I like things like that. Frustrating, but... It's nice.
How many records did you have to train for that? Or to make it useful?
God.
Or accurate?
I don't know, about 190,000, I think.
Yeah.
I had more. Yeah, you're right, actually. When it was training on the database view, it just kept erroring. And I kind of figured out there's that many joins in the database view, it may not like it. So I took a different tact.
Yeah.
And I'm getting something back. So it's good. It's good. It's always good when you're frustrated and then you overcome the hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting to know afterwards, like, what the value of doing things that way, as opposed to assignment rules or, whatever kind of rules to set fields.
Yeah, I think it's definitely podcast worthy to talk about predictive intelligence, and I can share my
good topic
experience and learnings from it as well, which would be quite useful. So yeah, I've been playing with that this week, but we're not here to talk about predictive intelligence.
We're not.
This week, get ready for it. We're here to talk about to flow or not to flow.
They probably found that out from the title of the podcast. So that, any kind of like virtual drum rolls or sudden reveals were.
Yeah, I tried to say it in a dramatic way. You kind of ruined it for me.
I did a little. To flow or not to flow. In the title,
but to flow or not to flow. What does that actually mean? Well, I'll kick us off because I'm already talking. But it's something that I know you and I have discussed before, and it's come up many times. We've had Flow Designer for a couple of years now. Right? It's not a new thing anymore. They keep adding new features to it. We all know that. We know that I'm going to call it legacy flow. It's kind of something that's there, kind of sniffing about, but it's come out of favour. All the new trainings is on Flow and Flow Designer.
Yeah.
But Flow shouldn't be seen as a direct replacement for workflow.
Nope.
Legacy workflow. But the question is, in what instances do you use Flow? What decisions do you make to use Flow over something perhaps such as a scheduled job or a business rule, or even, dare I say, we know Flow and Integration Hub, you've got spokes. So that are doing like web services, REST calls.
Yeah.
Now, or even what decisions do you make to say, well, I'll use Flow for my REST calls over what I'm going to call kind of legacy REST APIs that you can create using script.
Yep.
So there's the tagline: to flow or not to flow.
And I think,
what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So my first thoughts around Flow are, you're right. It's been around for a little while. I think when it came out in Kingston, it was. It created this kind of those on Team Flow and those on Team Workflow.
So are we coming back to like the Ronaldo Messi argument last time?
Yeah, I think we are. The old school pro coders. Again, it's another one of those, isn't it? Pro code, no code. What team are you on? Those who are very old school are very used to workflow, the way it's used, and the benefits of using it, and its UI. And those, I've been speaking to some of our grads recently who have only known Flow Designer. So those who have come on to ServiceNow and not even touched workflow.
Yeah, but so just on that, right, just on that, and I've come across that before. So the teachings is, and you've just clarified it there, is flow designer all the way, right? And they don't tend to look at workflow in training courses.
Yeah.
However, you're a new person. You're new to the industry. You've learned flow. You don't know anything about workflow, and yet you're expected to administer or debug things that are using legacy workflow. Right?
Yes.
That's
exactly.
a common situation.
Yeah, very common. I'd say probably. I don't know what the split would be, but if I was to guess, I would say, you're going to find more workflow compared to flows for the likes of catalog flows or change.
Yeah, I think you're right at the minute. Yeah,
at the minute,
I think
that's going to change probably in the next year or so. I would say it would probably flop to the other side. But yeah, no, it was interesting to hear just about how they've struggled with the UI of workflow in comparison to flow, whereas where I come from, we're just using workflow majority of the time until at least London or Madrid. My thing was the other way around. Like, I was able to pick up flow a lot quicker. It was logical to me. A lot of what I do in my day-to-day basis is I deal in lists, and seeing things in that kind of list sort of view, in my mind, logically, I can understand things better rather than a big spaghetti diagram. So no, it was good getting different perspectives from that. And I think to address the question of to flow or not to flow is understanding, like you say, what it can and can't do is what I was going to suggest. So where you're going to come up with issues in Flow Designer, where in workflow or in a simple script, for example, you can do things 10 times quicker and it's 10 times easier to read and to maintain.
Yeah.
There's still those challenges. It's not going to answer everything, but there is clear signs where it does do things a lot better.
Okay. So let me put you on the spot.
Yep.
If you've been given a scenario to, I can't think of one. I will. We can edit this bit out while I think. What's your default, right? Do you, as an architect, do you go straight for flow and then work backwards and say, well, I can't achieve what I want to using flow, therefore I'm gonna revert back to either legacy workflow or scripting? Or do you go for scripting and say, well, can I shoehorn this into a flow? What's your thought process?
Good, fantastic question. And
I know
my default opinion is to start with flow. Start with flow because, as you've already touched on, and a fantastic point in that anything new and upcoming is going to go into Flow Designer. You're not going to get any improvements and enhancements in workflow. Flow Designer does majority of what happens in workflow anyway. It's the future. Flow Designer is the future. That's where everything's going. Only if you can't achieve something in Flow Designer do you then have a look at these other tools. But I will caveat that with an it depends, because if we're talking about workflows, a process flow of maybe through catalog, change, whatever else, incident, then absolutely. But in your design thinking and your planning and things like that, if it's a business rule we're talking about, something completely different from, what a workflow can do, if we're talking about business rules, you might want to think about that before you start trying to do it in flow, because I think majority of the people through insert and update business rules and scripts, your starting point is a business rule, not in flow. So then this is where you're kind of expanding what Flow Designer can really do, to do the same thing what you're used to doing in business rules.
Yeah.
So there are examples where it depends, but if it's the standard, I'd say integrations, yes, absolutely, start with flow. If it's workflow-driven logic, then yes, start with flow. Yep. Only when it becomes too complex are you starting to think about using workflow in those examples.
Right, that is a good summary. That is the only thing I would challenge slightly, is that I agree with, if it's an integration, you de facto is go to flow.
Yep.
And there's obviously license implications
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
You
yeah.
speak
You
to your
have to take
account
it
manager, your service account manager. Nice on there.
Yeah,
We
we just
are
need a
not qualified
soundbite
to
for that,
talk
don't we?
We're not qualified to talk about licensing. Anyway,
Yep.
That I think you're correct. I think if it's processing logic, so process automation type logic, then
Yep.
again, I think Flow Designer is your go-to. If it's things such as you were talking about, your business rule is a schedule or a scheduled job is your alternative, again, I think you're right. I think the de facto is Flow Designer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to challenge that because, and I had a scenario this week, actually, where I wanted to run a scheduled job. No, let me rephrase. I wanted to do some processing based on a schedule, right?
Yep.
So I went straight to Flow Designer because you can trigger it based on a schedule.
Yep.
And it had to do a few lookups and checks. There's about 3 or 4 different lookups, and then send out an email. It was an approval reminder thing, right? But I've got to be honest, there was times when I was going through that in my head. I know, 'cause I'm going to consider myself a pro coder for the purpose of this conversation, right? But in my head, I know whilst I was doing it, I can do this faster in a scheduled job. I can script it quicker because I have more control over variable types. I have more control over what I put inside those variables. I can debug it faster. I find Flow Designer sometimes takes a while to load. I do like the execution, so you can debug Flow Designer. I do like that. But I find because I can move quite quick, it lags for me. And in my head, I was thinking, I'm doing multiple. Maybe there's a better way of doing this, but I was doing multiple kind of record lookups in Flow Designer. Where I'm thinking, well, in the script, I'd just output that to an array and then iterate through the array. I wouldn't do nested while loops. Do you see what I mean? The end result is I pursued the Flow Designer and I continued with it. But I will say I think it took me twice as long.
Yes.
To do.
Yep.
But then also at the back of my head, and I'm talking you through my thought process. Also at the back of my head, I think it's something you said before, is that doing it in Flow Designer, it's short-term pain for long-term gain. Because while I'm doing it, I am thinking, this is, and I mentioned this on another podcast, that my daughter can understand Flow Designer. She can come in and say, "Oh, why are you using Scratch?" That's what it was called. I couldn't remember last time. The application they use at school is Scratch.
Yep.
But she could kind of follow it in a logical format. So when you say it's the future, I think you're right that, all through my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is taking twice as long. But
Yep.
I have to remember, and we have to remember as technical bods, is that it's not just for us. It's for people that it's for the stuff we're going to leave behind for people to administer.
Yes, exactly. And that's almost more valuable than leaving them with a heap of code to try and sift through. If you're thinking in the future, if the people who are administrating the ServiceNow platform are potentially going to be no coders or low coders, potentially, then 100% is the right way to go. Even though it's going to look a bit silly in these kind of loops, I'm sure ServiceNow will come up with ways to make it a bit more logical in the flow for them sort of complex, nesting query scenarios. I'm sure they will find ways to make that a bit easier.
Yeah, that's another thing, isn't it? Because some of the guidance, or at least definitely what I've heard, is if it's complex logic, maybe think not Flow Designer, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is another podcast in its own right, but what do we define as complex logic? At what point do you go, this is complex?
Yeah. What is
it too late? Have you already gone too far? Do you know what I mean? How do you make that distinction in your design process?
Can your nan understand it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Is any script at this point advised against?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Or it depends if the customer that you're working with actually has a good support mechanism where they do have pro coders and people who understand that and they prefer that method, then you'd have to take that into consideration, not just low code, no code to try and pander to people who are more, essentially business users.
Yeah, that is a good point. The project you're working on or the customer that you're working for may have that architectural standard that says, hey, everything.
Yes.
They might say we don't want anything in Flow Designer. I can't think why they'd ever say that.
Yep.
But equally, they might say everything has to be, and I've been in this situation before, is everything has to be in Flow Designer, and if it's not, you need to bring it in front of the technical architecture board.
Yeah, yep.
Or to have some kind of review from an architect to explain why it can't be in there.
Yeah, which I think is the fantastic takeaway of this, is defining that in the architecture standards so you know what rules you're working to.
Yes.
I'm sure there's going to be a general rule of thumb, which sounds like it's going to be Flow Designer first.
I think you and I are both agreeing on that. The intention is you go into the requirements thinking Flow Designer first. Now, why can't I do it in Flow Designer?
Yeah.
Is a simple tagline.
Yeah. I did a little bit of research in terms of...
You've researched this topic before we've spoken.
I know, a little.
That's cheating.
Is it?
That is cheating.
I wanted to get like an official line from ServiceNow, essentially, about when are the cases when you should use Flow Designer. And essentially their line is this.
Hang on, are you going to read this off the screen?
I'm going to read this off my screen on this other screen that you hear. Right, I'm going to quote.
This is quoted
and
from...
I quote, "If you are creating something new, start with Flow Designer. However, there are a few cases you will need to use Workflow." So this is a whole Flow Designer versus Workflow.
So they're still
argument.
telling you to use Workflow.
So
that is interesting. So I thought they'd said, I thought as part of the training, they're now saying do not use Workflow.
Well, I don't think they're saying.
Wrong? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure they're encouraging against, but I think they're still saying that there is still some scenarios where it is better to use Workflow.
Okay, thanks.
They haven't obviously sunsetted it, and there's still a lot of their applications who do use Workflows still.
You've heard it here first, people. You're allowed to use legacy Workflow.
Yeah, and the reasons that they mention to use Workflow is things like exactly what we mentioned around if the process requires complicated or scripted logic, where it can be written in Workflow, and it's suggesting it can be written in Workflow and called from a flow, which I'm not so sure about.
Ooh, that's weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
Just 2 points on this is, one, we needed to bother talking so much on this podcast. You could have read that out. I could have just read this out. That would have, yeah.
But it's good to get the opinions out before we're shot down.
I wasn't cheating, though, to be honest. So there's that point.
Yep.
But the other one is use Flow Designer to create your flow. No, the other way around. Use Workflow to call a flow. So just for anyone that doesn't know this already, you can call flows via a script, and that's where it gets really interesting. You can trigger a flow, subflow, or action via a script, so script include or business rule or something. But obviously that transpires you can do it for a workflow. That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it was an odd one. I've not tried. I wouldn't even advise doing that.
Well, one of the things I always used to do is if I did any scripting in a workflow, I would create a script include and do all the scripting inside the script include. So a workflow activity would call that, and I'd have all the logic contained in there. So absolutely, I can see it working, but my God, that's an architectural nightmare, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Having this kind of hybrid, that screams.
That's a no from me.
Sorry, ServiceNow, but
that's a quote on their website.
Yeah.
Or on their doc site or something. Clarify just in case they come after me.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll link it to the episode.
Put the link in the description below. And actually, whilst on that, if anyone's got any thoughts on what they do in terms of what decisions they make or what steps they make in order to determine whether to go down Flow Designer or just normal scripting, by that we mean business rules, script includes workflows, whatever. Send us an email because it's all interesting. We can talk about them at a later date and share everyone's thoughts. Yeah, and in terms of usability, I did something interesting as well. Is more prep. I set up a survey. Why are you prepping for this?
I know, I'm just way too organised for this now.
You've got too much time on your hands.
Basically, I wanted to understand from different developers in our practice what tool do they prefer. Do they prefer Flow? Do they prefer Workflow? Obviously, these people are of different levels of experience with ServiceNow. Those started recently and who are old school developers. And the different things I wanted to kind of check against is things like what do you prefer for locating an existing flow, or the general usability or look and feel,
I can't
speed.
take this. You're too organised for this. I need to step my game up.
Would you like to know the results?
Tell us the results,
are
James.
That majority.
Hang on, this is a survey, all right?
This is a survey I set up only today. I'll stress that. It's something I set up today in the last few hours.
You're not that organised then.
No, well, yeah, compared to normal. But for majority of these kind of attributes, such as locating an existing flow, general usability, speed, and creating flow logic, like if, else, and for each, and like the complex logic, and using current context, which I found weird, all preferred workflow compared to flow.
Really?
And the two attributes which are preferring Flow Designer was troubleshooting executions, which I agree. I think it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Pretty good in Flow Designer.
To debug Flow is better. Yep.
As long as you got the property turned on.
Yep. Yes. Oh, yes.
As well as creating triggers. So obviously triggers are much easier in Flow. They're very similar, I'd say, but that was very overarchingly.
I think that's just because they're at the top of the
Flow
screen, aren't they?
Workflow. Yeah.
Yeah, triggers are there, kind of in your face. You can't.
Yeah, so
that's
they were
interesting, though.
General, very high level questions about usability and UI, really. But Workflow came out on top.
And that survey was across a mix of people with different experience.
Yeah.
And all three of them said, I'm only joking.
I got more than three responses.
How many people-ish?
So that was 15 responses.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad. Have that. If anyone from ServiceNow is listening, have that.
Yeah.
So, but the overarching is people prefer
workflow.
And that was going to... So my last question, I'm conscious of time here and whether people have turned off or not. But one of my questions, right, is it sounds like people still prefer workflow. There's a couple of things I like about Flow. What frustrates you about workflow? But better than that, what can they do to make it better? What would make you tick Flow for all of those questions that you asked in your survey? That's a question for you, by the way.
That's a question. I thought it's for the listeners.
Oh, it is for the listeners as well. If that's an absolutely valid question. If they want to drop us a line using the email, absolutely tell us. But
for me,
what's yours?
What would make me tick all of them? I think the biggest thing for me, and we've kind of touched on it already, is to be honest with you, when I filled this out, I filled the majority of these as going towards Flow Designer. A lot of things was equal. Things like looking for existing flows. I actually quite like the look and feel of Flow Designer, to be honest with you. I know the graphical interface is getting there. But the biggest thing for me, what would make me switch over from everything I do, is the logic. The logic was the thing for me about having complex logic in an easy-to-read format. Things that you could easily do within script, as you mentioned, within a few lines. If you're able to translate that in a better way or easier to read fashion within Flow Designer, that would tick almost all boxes for me then.
For me, I think the interface needs to be faster. What I don't like is when you want to do something, but sometimes you have to write a script, so you have to create an action. So you need to load up a different screen, create your action, publish it, then put it back into the... It just seems a lot of faffing about.
Yeah.
I know they've got different tabs, but maybe if I could load that on a different screen. So I do a lot of opening new tabs with script and flick between quite quick. And I think the scripty element inside, when you can like drag and drop your pills over, but you've got access to be able to script in the fields.
Yeah.
That needs to be quicker as well. It needs to be more intuitive on kind
I actually do
the
agree with
objects
that.
you're selecting.
Yeah.
So
It's still an element of scripting in there.
Yeah, the theme around mine is scripty based, isn't it? Ooh.
Yes.
God, I'm old school.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is where the debate goes, isn't it? A lot of the old school guys prefer certain methods, but I think you're kind of converted. I think you're converted to flow. I think.
Oh,
regardless.
absolutely.
But, yeah, a lot of the old school guys are not yet.
Nothing better. I am converted to flow, but there is nothing better than writing a function.
Yeah. Ooh.
Do you know what? Actually, I did a YouTube video a while back, and someone, I think they're actually in Canada. Their location doesn't make a difference, so I don't know why I mentioned that. But one of their comments was nice functions, and I've actually said to someone, I said that's the best compliment I've ever had in my life.
I think you should get a T-shirt with that on. That'd be a fantastic
nice
T-shirt.
Functions. Yeah, that could be the service ducks. Nice functions.
I like
Okay, so what are the key learnings? Let's wrap this up.
Yeah,
we're past the half an hour and people are starting to get bored.
Yep.
Let's wrap this up. To flow or not to flow? James, what are you saying?
To flow. I think, yes. I think as we and ServiceNow advise, your first starting point being Flow Designer is a good thing. I think defining these architecture principles is also useful. Understanding who is going to be taking this over from you is also a very good thing to have under your design considerations.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
So to sum it up for me, yes, try it in Flow first. If you can't do it in Flow, then think about other options. And yeah, just get on board. And it might take a mindset change for those who are so used to the kind of scripting side of things. But yeah, I think just try and get on board the Flow train.
Yeah, I'll go with that. And what would we like our listeners to do? Is there anything that we'd want to know from them, to go and investigate, to come back to us? What do we need? What do we want?
I would investigate ways where you have recently implemented something in workflow but haven't tried it in Flow. So, get into your PDIs, having a go of just re-implementing what you had done. It might be just a process thing, or approvals, or if you've not tried catalog with Flow Designer yet, find where the pain points are and see what you can achieve in Flow. Maybe time it. Give yourself a challenge. Time a challenge between trying to create something in Flow compared to workflow.
That's a good answer, but I was more getting at, we want them to follow the podcast, Russ. That's what I was getting at. What do we want? Click follow.
Like, share, subscribe.
I don't think you can on these.
No.
Okay, but no, that's a good summary. Thanks for that, James. It's been an interesting conversation. I know something that we've talked about, and I've talked about many times with other people.
It's a bit more deep today, isn't it?
You what, sorry?
It's a bit more deep today.
Yeah, it's a bit deep, isn't it? A bit serious. Well, let's not do that next time. Let's bring some humour back in.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good summary. So I think until next time, I think I've been Russ.
I've been James.
And this is Service Ducks.
That's all for today's podcast. Thank you for listening, and if you want to get your question answered by the Service Ducks, get in touch through Talk to the Duck at service-ducks.com, or just use one of the links below.